Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to Pop Culture Philosophers. I'm your host for today's festivities, Rockin Robbie Billups, and let's get right into it. We are bringing in a writer who I have been a fan of for several years. You will know him as the writer of the Elvira series from Dynamite. You will know him as the writer of Drawing Blood, along with Kevin Eastman, which is being published over at Image Comics currently, and also the upcoming Red Sonja Noir and many other works that we did not even name. Tons of stuff. Zorro, Doc Savage, I believe. Absolutely tons of stuff. Betty Page. Let's bring him in. It's David Avallone. How you doing, my man?
I'm doing great. How you doing, Robbie?
Doing great. I knew this day was coming. I've been working with Dynamite for a few years, and I was like, I can't believe I haven't had David on the show yet. So thank you for gracing us with your presence.
Overdue. My absolute pleasure.
Yeah, I know. I was there was a couple years ago. I actually kind of got perturbed because my buddy Omar over at Near Mint Condition and my buddy Travis over at Comics with Bueller got to have you and Cassandra on. And I was like, Nick, I'm the biggest Elvira fan you know, man. What's going on?
Yeah, no, she's a great interview and she's great to have on shows, without a doubt.
Absolutely. Well, you got a new one coming up, Red Sonja Noir.
Yes.
And you are quite a fan, I know, of Pulp Fiction. Not that I don't know about the movie. Maybe you are. I believe your father wrote Pulp Fiction back in the day.
Yes, my dad, Michael Avallone, wrote about 200 published novels, and a lot of them were in the hard-boiled detective series. He had a series character named Ed Noon, and the first Ed Noon novels are from 1953, and the last one's from 1985. So he had a pretty long run with Ed. And, so I was raised in that kind of stuff, and I'm a big reader and enjoyer of it. And when Joe Rybant, their editor-in-chief or senior editor or whatever title he has these days, reached out and said, do you want to do a Red Sonja? I had this idea kicking around for a while of putting her in the kind of story she usually doesn't get to do. Something that takes place in a city. A Hyperborean city, but a city, and something that's, and I'm not denigrating anyone who has ever written her before. A lot of great writers have written her and written her smart. Gail Simone, Mark Russell, just off the top of my head. Great writers who always made Red very smart. But I wanted to do one that was like about her ability to figure out a situation and like do essentially a detective story with Red Sonja. And it's modeled pretty closely on a classic detective story, which I think if you read it when it comes out, there will be no mystery about what it's based on. But when it came time to talk about soliciting it and all that, I said, why don't we throw the word noir on the end of Red Sonja? And if this thing sells, we'll do another one. I'll do another one that's not set in deserts or forests, but is set in a densely populated area and is more about, intrigue and detection than about lopping people's heads off. Yeah. Though it's Red Sonja, so heads are lopped off. Like, I don't want anyone to come into this thinking that there's not all sorts of sword and sorcery in it. There's all sorts of sword and sorcery in it.
So how did the character of Red Sonja lend itself to that type of storytelling, did you find?
Well, that's kind of the interesting thing. She's usually not in stories like that, but I thought it was a perfectly fine. I always think of her as, she's not someone who's had a traditional education, but she's had the education of living in the world and knowing what the world's people are like and dealing with all sorts of human beings and human nature. So in that way, that's what most detectives are like. It's not about, we don't hear about what college Sam Spade may or may not have attended. It's not about that. It's about knowing human beings and knowing what motivates them. And I felt like she has that as a character. She has to assess people's danger to her, among other things, in every situation she ever walks into. So let's put her in a situation where she has to figure things out, and it's all based on her abilities as a detective.
Yeah. Now I love that it's set still in like the typical Red Sonja setting, right? But was it tempting for you to set it in like, let's do like a multiverse type thing, like they've been doing Vampirella and all that kind of stuff, and set it in 40s LA or something like that?
Sure, I enjoy that stuff, but to me, then she's just not Red Sonja anymore. I don't think. Look, you can do whatever you want with whatever character, but I think that would take her too far from who she is. She's not a private detective in this. She's a mercenary, and her partner is killed within the first 4 or 5 pages, and she sets out to find out who killed her partner. And I do some jokes about time and setting, like I have to make sure the colorist makes sure this joke lands, but like the king's soldiers wear copper armor, so everyone calls them coppers. To me, that's a perfectly reasonable way to sneak that piece of slang in, and to sneak a piece of 1930s slang in.
Yeah.
She refers to the king's soldiers as coppers, and they perform a police-like function, but they're not the police. So things like that, I tried to get in, but no, I like her in her. I like Sonja in her element. But that said, people have. Someone wrote a Red Sonja in New York at one point, but it was a time travel thing, and she was still Red Sonja. She was still the barbarian lady in the coins, the coin bikini with the sword. And I do think you have to honor that a little bit.
Yeah. What's your history with the character? Like, were you reading those Roy Thomas comics back in the day? Was it the movie? Okay, yeah.
I've been familiar with her over the years. I will say that, and I'm not just saying this as a company man, she's an incredible rebirth at Dynamite. I mean, I like the old Roy Thomas stuff, but in the Roy Thomas era, she really is just Conan in a bikini. Like, there's not a lot of demarcation there. She's got Conan's origin story. It's just in a bikini. And I like what writers have been doing with her at Dynamite, and what writers. I mean, I've seen the Bridget Nielsen movie. It's not good. I can't say that made me a fan. But
I was dating this woman one time, and she was like, my favorite movie is Red Sonja. And I was like, man, I haven't seen that since I was a kid. So we watched it, and she was like, what'd you think? I was like, I really love that you love that movie so much.
Yeah. Gotta go.
Yeah.
Prior engagement. Lovely meeting you. Never call. Lose my number. No, I mean, look, we all have things we saw when we were kids that are not particularly good, but are great because we love them.
Yeah.
I still watch Star Trek, the motion picture, at least once a year. It's not good, but I love it. I love it very, 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 very much.
So, you see, that's my favorite Star Trek movie, because I'm a big Trekker. And
yeah.
I'm always like, that movie to me speaks the most to what the original vision of the series was, right? Like, I love Wrath of Khan. I love, what's that?
I said, I don't disagree. I think it's the most Star Trek of the Star Trek movies.
Yeah,
and
they kind of get a little Star Warsy after that, which is cool. I love Wrath of Khan. I love Undiscovered Country.
There are episodes of the original series that are very space opera-y. So it's not completely off model, but the motion picture is the only one that's actually a science fiction movie.
Yeah. I agree. I love how
it's got a science fiction premise, and it's about that premise, and that premise is kind of interesting. And
and Robert Wise did one of the greatest sci-fi films of all time, Day the Earth Stood Still.
Sure.
We love and I love his approach of, like, I don't know, like awe and majesty to everything. Like, I'm sorry, a 10-minute introduction to the ship alone, sign me up. Like, that's like my favorite part of the movie.
Right? Yeah, no, it's beautiful. And also, as an aside, I love it when directors get out of the way and let the composer take over the storytelling for 5 minutes, which he does with Jerry Goldsmith about 8 times in that movie. He goes,
yeah, right.
Take it away, special effects and Jerry Goldsmith. We're all just going to sit here, stare slack-jawed, listening to the beauty and the majesty and digging the cool visuals. But
my local con is coming up in a couple of weeks, and I always do a lot of panels there, usually comic book panels, and celebrities that are like, if there's a horror celebrity there, I'll do their panel or something
Sure.
like that because I'm a big horror head. And so today I got this giant list of names that I got to do panels for. And one of them was William Shatner. And I was like, I messaged the dude back. I was like, bro, I don't know, man. Like William Shatner, he's like, dude, don't even worry. He doesn't want anybody on stage. You just kind of got to sit there, rephrase the questions from the audience, and keep
Right.
an eye on the time. But like,
Yeah.
I was like, I don't know if I can handle being on there with William Shatner. That's just
Yeah,
too much for me.
that's definitely a big one. That's definitely a big one. I mean, since I was watching reruns in 1971, 72, when I was a very little kid. But that said, going back to Red, I have written a Red Sonja short story for Dynamite, for the Black, White, and Red series they did. And I actually worked on development for the upcoming Red Sonja movie, but that's when it was in the hands of a different director. So I don't particularly expect that any of my work will survive, which is fine.
Oh, wow.
And I did write a Betty Page multiverse comic where she becomes Red Sonja for the first issue, and then Vampirella for the second issue, and Deja Thoris in the third issue, and Tinkerbell in the fourth issue. Betty Page Unbound. It's one of my favorite things I've ever written. But yeah, so I've written her before, and I have some background with her. And I take that into doing this one shot.
Did you have this pitch ready, just knowing how much work you've done with Dynamite, that this would pop up eventually?
Funny thing is, I can't remember when it was. It might have been right before the pandemic. I pitched this as a 5-issue series, and Joe said, great. And then I don't know what came up. I think he probably said, but finish this Elvira thing first. And then, no, finish this other Elvira thing first. And then I think the pandemic hit. And it kept getting shuffled off to next time. Because I've been doing work with Dynamite pretty much nonstop for a long time. And we hadn't hit like a gap for it. And then when he reached out about doing a one shot, I said, how about we resurrect that Crimson Calypso story that I had? And he was like, yeah, great. I resent him the pitch I had sent last time. I said, now this was originally going to be stretched pretty thin over 5 issues. If it's a one shot, I said, I need at least 30 pages for it. And he said, okay, I can give you 30 pages. And then when I was in the last 4 or 5 pages, I wrote him and I said, can I have 32 pages? And he said, no. So I was like, okay, fair. The budget is what it is. The plan is what it is. And I think I made it work. But yeah, I'm adapting something fairly large into a pretty tight set of pages. And I combined characters and situations and things to make that work.
Okay. Man, looking forward to it. It drops in June, I believe. Yeah. And who's your artist on this?
A relatively new guy named Edu Mena. I hope I'm pronouncing his name right. It's funny. I can look in my email right now. Yeah, Edu Mena. I think he's a recent-ish graduate from the Kubert School, and nice. We've worked together before. I've done 3 issues, of Dynamite's Savage Tales, in which I do little 8-page short stories. And he's done the 2 John Carter Warlord of Mars stories that I did for those.
Okay.
He did one, the first one was called The Honeymoon on Mars, and it was John and Deja getting their honeymoon interrupted. And the second one was called Mutiny on Mars, and that came out just February, I think. In Savage Tales. They keep calling them it's Winter Special #1. It's really the issue 4, but that's okay. Like, you can keep numbering them however you want, but
yeah, I mean, your Elvira run should be nearing 50 at this point, right?
Yeah,
but...
yeah, it would be just about actually up to 40. That's if you don't cut the specials in half.
Okay.
If you make this, because there are 2 or 3 40-page specials, so if you and there's also a 150-page Elvira graphic novel coming up that's not even scheduled yet.
Oh, nice.
My work on it is finished, and I think even the line art's done. I think we're just waiting for the proper timing for it to drop.
Nice. Well, before I ask that, like, how did your relationship with comic books start? Were you reading them as a
My
kid?
relationship with comics, yes, I read comics as a kid. I will say that as a consumer, it's one of the tragedies of comic books that makes our job an uphill battle. They're not exactly easy to get your hands on anymore, in the sense of, when I was a kid, you walked into a 7-Eleven, there was a spinner rack. Now, the 7-Eleven spinner rack, and also there was a thing we used to call a candy store, which is, imagine a Rite Aid that's got a diner in it and also has a giant magazine section. Those always had great comic book sections. But that model makes it very hard to, like, the 7-Eleven guy is not necessarily ordering every issue. It's, it's not you come in Wednesday morning and get the next issue. No, he gets them when he gets them. He puts them out when he puts them out. So reading like a series and staying invested in it was a lot of work.
I remember when I was a kid picking them up on the newsstands, right?
Yeah.
At grocery stores and stuff. Because I started reading like in the mid 80s. And you would miss issues. And you would be like, man, what am I? And I remember when I found out that these things called comic book stores existed in the early 90s. And I was like, blew my mind. I remember my stepdad taking me there. And I was like, here's all the issues of Fantastic Four I'm missing. He's like, bro, this is like hundreds of dollars. We're not doing that.
Exactly. Yeah, no. Yeah, comic book stores start a little earlier than that. I think I have my first pull list in high school in 82 or 83, but they were not common, and you had to go looking for them. So that's another challenge of getting your comics, reading them every month, all that. And also, comics kind of go through trends, and sometimes I don't love the trend, and I gotta say, I backed away from comics in the 90s. When, no disrespect to these guys, but when everyone started drawing like Art Adams, and I love when Art Adams draws like Art Adams, I don't love so much when other people draw like Art Adams. And then everybody was drawing like him. And you got the pouches, and you got the guy who can't draw feet. And I just, I was not interested in any of those books. I got to say also, I was never a huge superhero guy. I read Superman off and on. I read the X-Men off and on. But honestly, the stuff that was on my pull list was Star Wars, was The Unknown Soldier. I liked World War II comics from when I was a kid, which plays into one of the next things I have coming up, actually. I read, when DC had a Star Trek comic, that was on my pull list. I liked the space opera stuff. I liked all of the space opera that would creep into the X-Men from time to time. But yeah, I wasn't reading Captain America, wasn't reading Spider-Man particularly. Like, I liked the Spider-Man animated show that was on when I was a kid, but it didn't make me run out and read Spider-Man comics necessarily. Big Nick Fury fan. Loved Elektra Assassin, partly because it was a Shield based story in its own crazy way. Loved, and in the 80s there was an explosion of indie comics that was very exciting to me. I think when people talk about the comics explosion in the 80s, and they limit it to two superhero books from DC Comics, I'm like, you're forgetting Chaykin's American Flag, you're forgetting Matt Wagner's Mage and Grendel, you're forgetting Scott McCloud's Zot, you're forgetting Nexus, you're forgetting Love and Rockets. There were more great indie comics than you could consume, and there were new ones, and Marvel had a great creator-owned line. Epic, I think I read every Epic book when Epic was out there. Dreadstar and the Star Slammers, and Coyote was a great book. Aztec Ace, like, these are books no one remembers, but to me, that was the revolution.
I knew we were going to get along, because you just said something that speaks so close to my heart. And I know the two books you're talking about, this Watchmen and Dark Knight Returns.
Of course.
Right?
Of course.
And
of course, they're great. I'm not
giant. Yeah, they're great
arguing
books
with their greatness.
But dude, Love and Rockets, American Flag, those books you were talking about, Nexus.
American Flag comes before Watchmen and Dark Knight Returns, and I would heavily suggest that it is a huge influence on both of those books. a lot of the things Frank Miller does with like TV screens and bold graphics and 20 panels on a page instead of 5. Chaykin was really knocked it out of the park and completely reconfigured what comic books were like and what you could do in them. And I think that influenced everybody. It didn't influence everybody as much as Alan Moore's anatomy lesson going, everything you know is wrong. But unfortunately, that everything you know is wrong thing applied to Swamp Thing was genius. You have to be a genius to come up with that for a comic book character. And almost everything you know is wrong take is like, but what if Bruce Wayne's parents didn't die? It's like, oh.
What if Xavier's really a bad guy?
Yeah, it's like it's I mean, you know, I love Bendis, but the Shield is really Hydra thing is bad, cynical, toxic nonsense, and I hate it.
Well, you're such a hardcore Shield fan. That makes sense, right?
Yeah. Well, you know what it is, and again, this relates to. I'll bring it up again in a minute because it's probably one of my next comics coming up. But my father was a World War II veteran, and one of the things he wrote in the '60s was The Man from U.N.C.L.E. He was a sergeant in Europe in the '40s. My father was Nick Fury. So when Nick Fury is an asshole, I think that's bad writing because it's the same thing with Captain America. There are people whose post-Watergate brain is so poisoned that they can't imagine a patriot who fought for his country who's actually a liberal that's not a part of the, you know, that's not a part of the problem. You know what I mean? It's I judge writers a lot on how if they're able to write Nick Fury and understand that he's a character from a Frank Capra movie. He's not James Bond. He's a guy that believes that one man can stand up against all the evils in the world. And I don't mind people writing him as someone who cuts corners and who stomps on people's feelings and who isn't sensitive. That's fine. That's, you know, that can apply. But it's a guy who at his heart is trying to do the right thing. And I think people get that wrong left and right. All due respect for Garth Ennis, but he does not understand the kind of man Nick Fury was, even the tiniest little bit. And that's okay. You know, those comics also exist for people to read. They're just not for me.
Yeah. Wow. That's really freaking cool. So do you got a Nick Fury story in the bag that you want to?
Not a Nick. Well, I have a Nick Fury. I come up with pitches that like are so fucked up no one will ever do them. I have a Nick Fury pitch for Marvel that I'm holding on to for someday.
Nick Fury travels through the war movie universe.
No, it's actually my version is it's Nick Fury basically in Casablanca. It's
cool.
My Nick Fury pitch is I don't think it works with the Secret Wars. I actually looked up the Secret Wars to see if it would work, but I wanted to do a story where the Fantastic Four vanish for a really long period of time, but Sue is left behind, and Sue and Nick Fury fall in love. And then as inevitably happens, the Fantastic Four return from outer space, and Nick has to do the Humphrey Bogart thing at the end of Casablanca and say, we're crazy about each other, but the universe needs you to be with Reed Richards, and I'm just going to walk off and be lonely and sad.
Yeah.
And continue saving the world in my own way, and you're going to go back to being Reed Richards' loving wife, and we're going to both pretend this never happened.
We'll always have the blue area of the moon.
Yeah, that was pretty much the pitch. But no, there's something that I've Dynamite almost never does creator-owned books, but I think partly because of my long association with them. I have a book. I just handed in the first script for it. I just talked to Joe about who is going to draw it today, called Two-Fisted Fairy Tales, which we will try to get out by the end of the year, but schedules may make that impossible. But it's a long-term dream project of mine. And very quickly, it's based on a true story, which is my elevator pitch to confuse people completely is that it's Saving Private Ryan meets The Princess Bride. And as the title Two-Fisted Fairy Tales might tell you, my dad, for whatever reason, when he told me the basic fairy tales, Three Little Pigs, Sleeping Beauty, Rumpelstiltskin, Stiltskin, he told me all of them as World War II combat stories about himself.
Oh, wow.
The first time my dad told me Little Red Riding Hood, Little Red is a member of the French Resistance. The wolf is a Gestapo officer. Instead of the huntsman coming in to save her, my dad kicks the door open and kills the wolf with a Colt 45 1911 semi-automatic pistol, like you do. And so that's what the series is. It's a series of all of the original fairy tales as told through this crazy post World War II tough guy pulp fiction kind of vibe.
Dude, that's awesome. That sounds great.
I'm having a lot of fun with it. On top of everything else, I'd originally considered it. I was going to just do the fairy tales, and sort of the hook was going to be, no, this is how they were told to me. But when I sat down to write it, it became a memoir comic as well. And the first page is me waking up in the middle of the night, 5 years old, and seeing a monster in the corner of my room and calling out for my parents, and they come in and turn on the light. And my father stays behind. And 5-year-old me asks him, have you ever seen a monster? And he's a World War II veteran. So he says, you know what? Yeah, 44, 45. That's what I was doing. I was chasing monsters across Europe in a little tank. And he says, you want to hear a story about it? And then he tells Little Red Riding Hood as a story about World War II. Wow. And that launches us into the one thing I do that my father absolutely did not do is I make it a epic connected narrative, where the first 5 issues are about the wolf doesn't eat grandma. The wolf throws grandma in a German half-track and sends her off to be tortured by the SS. So the first arc is a 4-man squad of American GIs helping a 10-year-old girl rescue her grandma from a castle.
That's awesome.
But we get 3 Little Pigs in there. We get Goldilocks and the 3 Bears in there. We get Sleeping Beauty. We get Rumpelstiltskin. And then it's going to be a 5-issue series, and I have ideas for 2 more 5-issue continuations after that. After we wrap up Little Red and her grandma, we have other places we can go.
That's a really cool concept. That sounds great. I love how personal that story is to you too. And I think sometimes that gets the best stuff comes from something personal.
That's why I decided to zoom out and make it also about my childhood and my parents, because it's very tied up in who I turned out to be as an adult human being and who I am as a storyteller, and how my dad told stories and how he viewed the moral universe. I mean, the point, you can get goofy talking about themes and things that people haven't read yet or that you haven't even finished writing yet. But why do we tell kids bedtime stories? We know that if we tell them there's no such thing as monsters, they're going to grow up and they're going to go out in the world and they're going to go, the fuck there isn't. There's definitely monsters in the world. So fairy tales tell kids that monsters can be defeated, that monsters can be now some of them don't. Some of them tell them that the monsters win if you're a very bad little boy or girl. But mostly literature about monsters is about they're there and you're going to see them in your life and they don't have to win. And I think that's a worthwhile message to put in a comic book in the year of our Lord 2025.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. Because I can't even imagine what it's like being a kid growing up today, like with everything that's going on and how instant communication is and news spreads and all that stuff. Like when I was growing up, like I thought the world's problems were solved. All the life was space shuttles and dinosaurs and superheroes and baseball,
I got to say, I had very political parents
Yeah.
My mother, actually, that's what she did for a living. She's a women's rights activist. She started the abortion rights movement in New Jersey and ran it for 25 years.
Oh man,
But
holy cow, your parents rock, dude.
yeah, no, they were both heroic. They left me with a lot to live up to. And so like even as a little kid, like when I was 7 years old, I was handing out flyers for the McGovern campaign, against Nixon at the state fair. Like, politics were always part of my life. And in the early 70s, even when you were a little kid, like Vietnam was on the evening news. Vietnam was in Time magazine, which we got every week. So I was, it was hard not to be aware. And also, I'm Jewish, and awareness of the Holocaust. Like, I can't remember the moment that it was explained to me that this is a thing that had happened. But I was conscious of it. I knew that there was one book on World War II in the house that I was forbidden to look at. And it was because it had photos of the death camps in it.
Oh,
and my parents didn't think I was ready for that. But that was like, I remember that so clearly. And I remember the first time I cheated and looked and went, okay, I'm sorry. I wasn't ready for this. They were right. This is too horrible. So, that's, and Dad was part of this epic thing. I mean, one thing that occurred to me just yesterday, which is kind of mind blowing to think about. So I think I was told these stories when I was 5, 6 years old. That's 1970. World War II was 25 years in the past. That's all. So today, 9/11 is as recent as Hitler's suicide was when I was a kid. Yeah. Think about that. Like, World War II wasn't some foggy, distant memory. I met a lot of veterans of that war. Some of them from my dad's squad actually came and would visit the house. So it was very vivid, and yet it was also unthinkably colossal. Like, it's hard to wrap your mind around. You see a movie like The Longest Day and you go, this is a thing that happened. Like, this is an actual, like, I don't see things like even in the Vietnam War, this isn't this kind of global conflict that touches everybody in the world and changes everybody's lives in one way or another.
Yeah.
That was sort of unheard of. But it was just recent enough. My dad had his Eisenhower. He's been gone many years now, but I have his Eisenhower jacket. I have his dress jacket from when he got out of the Army in my closet. So it's, it was very vivid to me when I was a kid. And now it's like, it's so unthinkably far in the past for people. Another 25 years later, another 30, 35 years later, it's now like an unbelievably distant, unknowable thing for people.
Yeah. Like, I got, so I run a comic shop, and we got a staff of a lot of, people in their late teens, early 20s.
Right.
And they mentioned things about like, oh man, yeah, 9/11, that was something that I read about in my history books. I was like, oh man, I was there. And then when I was a kid, I remember hearing about the JFK assassination,
right,
and Vietnam. And then, you realize that wasn't that long ago. But yeah, to me, World War II felt like, it could have been millennia ago or something like that, right? But I was having a conversation with one of these kids yesterday. He had found this video, and it's a video where they have done like a translation of one of Hitler's speeches in English. And he's like, this is scary. He's like, because I always just thought he was this like fictional monster out there. But to hear it in English, it's so scary because I'm hearing this kind of stuff today. And I'm like, the scariest thing is that wasn't even 100 years ago, brother.
Right.
Like, and if you think about it, like, even 100 years, the older I get, the more 100 years doesn't seem like a long time,
right?
Right.
Well,
but like, that's scary, dude.
I did a comic for Dynamite, ironically around 2016, that was Twilight Zone: The Shadow. And in it, I decided that the villains the Shadow was going to go up against in 1939 were American Nazis. And I researched them, and me and the artist faithfully recreated Camp Siegfried in Long Island, which was a place they had a fucking Nazi summer camp. And Dave Acosta beautifully drew their swastika topiary and their big houses and their uniforms. And I swear to you, every review that I read of that comic thought I made them up.
Wow.
Thought that the American Nazis were as fictional as the Shadow. And I was like, no, these were real people. These were real Americans. And just because the war starts and they all go underground, those people don't cease to exist.
Yeah.
They're still in like the grandchildren of those Nazis live in Long Island to this day. And I cannot speak to how they were raised by their grandparents and their parents who were at those Nazi rallies, you know, denouncing immigration, denouncing Jews, denouncing intelligentsia, denouncing FDR, all that. You know, those people are still out there. And
I'm down
we're
here
stuck
in
with them.
I've lived in Alabama pretty much my entire life, born and raised. And you know, we have a really problematic past with segregation and stuff like that. George Wallace, you know, all the stuff going on in the 60s with the civil rights movement. And that was always something that was very prevalent in my life because we have like a civil rights museum. We would go and visit it in school. And it was always something I was really, really into and passionate about, like, you know, unity and togetherness and like ending racism and stuff like that. And I hate to see everything. I don't know. When I was a teenager in the 90s, I kind of felt like, oh man, we're beyond that now. We've moved past all that. And no, man, it's like we keep repeating the same things sometimes, man. It's really scary, man.
Yeah. I mean, I will say this. I
And
think
that stuff still exists down here.
Oh,
you know, there's still certain cities that friends of mine know, oh, I can't go through that county. You know, like sundown counties. Like that. Yeah, it's terrible, man.
Yeah, no, that's the thing is, like, what happens is when the country is led by someone who has all of those dark feelings, sort of the worst thing that happens is that all the people who feel that way feel, oh, now it's open season and I can be this in public and I can say these awful things that I've had inside me all this time. And, you know, in better times, we shame those people into silence. Honestly, we make them realize, no, I like, you know, the way that a racist will get more angry at you for calling them a racist. You know, it's like, man, at least Confederate soldiers owned up. You know, at least at least the guys in the Nazi uniforms aren't saying, no, I love Jews. What's wrong with you? You know, it's like, no, you like at least have the stones to say, yeah, I'm a racist. I believe in these things. I believe in a country that's not the country that you believe in. You know, it's an interesting cultural thing. And it's also, I think it's why we got to keep, you always have to put this stuff in your art. I mean, I made a movie in college and I had a professor who was I was a film major and I still make film now and again. And he was an emigre from behind the Iron Curtain. He was a Hungarian theater teacher who had been forced to flee Hungary because he had kept doing political plays and all that. And I was making a movie and I said, well, it's not really a political piece. And he said, David, everything's a political piece. Every choice you make about what story you're going to tell and how you're going to tell it, a story that seemingly has no politics endorses the status quo. It means there's nothing you want to complain about in the world. There's no injustice. There's no, you know, and I thought that was that has always stayed with me. And especially given his credentials in the politicization of art, I think he wins that argument, that anything is political, and you can only choose to make it so bland that it's endorsing the world the way it is. But, you know, artists don't tend to want to make movies and write books and make comic books that say the world is perfect the way it is and there's nothing we should change and people are great.
Yeah. You know, those would be some boring movies, man.
Yeah. And the minute you make a choice about what your protagonist stands for and what your antagonist stand for, you've made a political movie. And look, people misunderstand the politics of movies that they love all the time. You know, an entire generation of young men think Tyler Durden is the hero of that movie.
Yeah.
There's nothing we can, you know, or think Rorschach is the hero of Watchmen. and not a reactionary racist scumbag. It's art. You can't prevent people from reading it entirely wrong.
Yeah.
There's
I was just
nothing.
on a show a few weeks ago about Fight Club, and we were talking about it,
Mhm.
and we got to, kind of the thematics of it, and it was like, this movie is severely misunderstood by a lot of people nowadays.
Yep.
And I think that a lot of people watch that movie and miss the point. And I remember watching it, it came out in 99 is when the movie came out. I was working at a movie theater, and I was like, that movie
Mhm.
changed my life. Part of it was, how important are these things? Right. But
Right.
it goes beyond that, because then when we live in this world filled with things, this new IKEA furniture is supposed to make me a complete person. And once I buy this sofa, I'm set and I'm complete. But then when
Right.
you realize the inherent emptiness of what that actually means for the human experience, what we're supposed to be doing,
Right.
then you're easy to manipulate
Mhm.
and kind of be pulled into something. And I think that's what Fight Club was more about to
Yeah.
me. But
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. But, part of the problem is when you make Brad Pitt the spokesman for a broken ideology of masculinity, you're making it attractive. The end. Like,
yeah,
no matter what you do to try to convince people, no, this guy's a psychopath and this is not how you exist in society in any real way. Too late, man. You cast Brad Pitt, everyone's going to think it's cool.
but
That's
I
the
mean, how many villains are the coolest characters in movies?
right.
And I think a big
Exactly.
part of that is understanding that all of that is inherent in all of us, right? But it's
Mhm.
like it's cool for me to be like, Darth Vader's the coolest character in this movie, but I would never act like Darth Vader. But there is something inside of me
Sure.
that does want to be Darth Vader, right?
Sure.
But then you're
Well,
like, yeah, go ahead.
everyone wants power, but of course also Darth Vader is a tragic figure, and he is redeemed in the end. He still has to die because he's a, genocidal maniac for most of his life.
Yeah,
But he does reform. And that's,
and that's
that's all,
powerful.
and that makes him a more interesting character. There are, it's hard to write villains well, because you kind of have to. I think the best villains, you go, well, you have a point, but you're going about it the most inhuman, worst possible way. Darth Vader doesn't really have a point, aside from, if you factor in the prequels, the Jedi suck and they're mean to me, is mostly what seems to be motivating him in that. And he's not wrong in that the Jedi do actually kind of suck. I mean, I think that's built into what Lucas is saying in the prequels. And I think one of the reasons people struggle so much with the prequels is not that they're well made or well written. They're very much not well written, but the Jedi aren't. Lucas is not unaware that the Jedi fail to recognize that Darth Sidious is across the hall in a carpeted office. Like,
Yeah.
only their corruption explains them not recognizing that Senator Palpatine is who he is. Like, they're not good at what they do. They are not up to the crisis when it arrives. And I think people didn't want that. They wanted, the Republic was a golden age and the Empire ruined it all. It's like the first line in the Star Wars novelization, which is the first Star Wars I think I ever consumed before I'd even seen the movie. I think I read at least the first chapter of it. And the first line in the prologue is, the old Republic was the Republic of legend, but like the greatest of forests, I'm paraphrasing, it rotted from the inside.
Oh man.
First thing he tells you is the old Republic was rotten. And Senator Palpatine was the rot, and they didn't catch it, and they let him be chancellor, and he destroyed them.
Yeah.
And but the rottenness, it's not unclear, it's not ambiguous that the rottenness is the reason Palpatine can do what he does. If the Republic was strong, if the Jedi were spotless and noble and good, Palpatine would not have been able to do what he did. It's because they were decadent and rotten and off their game that it happens. And
Yeah.
that's more complexity than George ever gets credit for, I think. I know everyone is reposting the Crawl from the Phantom Menace these days, which is about taxation of trade routes, and going, we owe George an apology for thinking this was for thinking this wasn't how tyranny begins in the galaxy with taxation of trade routes. George got that one right. How about that?
Sounds familiar. Phantom Menace is a very prophetic movie now.
Yeah, in its way, and the two that follow it. But yeah, George is more of a critic of American society and culture than he gets any credit for.
Yeah.
Because he's not a subtle writer, but ironically, his lack of subtlety leads people to miss the obvious lines he's drawing anyway. So
yeah, no, it's just about space wizards. Like, that's all it's about. All right. Well, while I have you here,
sure,
I would be remiss not to tell you how much of a fan I am of your Elvira work. Absolutely love it. Elvira meets Vincent Price, H.P. Lovecraft, the Mistress of the Dark series. Did you do the Shape of Elvira one too?
Yep, that's me.
Yep, you did that one. All right. Monsterland. I love all of them. I think they're so much fun because you are bringing that kind of like kitschy, silly, campy fun of what the character Elvira represents, and you're keeping that alive. And I know that Cassandra's a part of that. How did that all come about, and how's it like working with her?
She's great. How it came about is I was finishing up had just finished up the first Betty Page series, and I didn't know what I was going to do next with. I was pretty early in my career. I think I'd written I think Betty Page was maybe my fourth or fifth series for Dynamite. And Joe was in LA actually on business and took me out to dinner and said, what do you think about the Elvira license? And I said, honestly, I don't know what I'd do with Elvira. And I had a little bit of a reaction of like, oh, I don't want this niche. Like after Betty Page, I was like, are they just going to throw hot chick comics at me? And hot chicks who are not necessarily comic book characters with a world already built around them. Like I'm kind of creating something from scratch here a little bit. And I did that with Betty. And with Betty, what I did was I actually watched an old documentary about her, which was narrated by Betty herself. And listening to her voice, I went, I can write adventures for this. This is an interesting woman with an interesting mind and set of life experiences. And I can write her. And there had been a pitch for a new Elvira series that had failed. And I said, send me that pitch and let me read it because I want to know what approach not to take. But ironically, because Elvira is the character I've most written in comics, I was literally like, I had no idea what I'm going to do with her. I don't know what adventures in comic book world Elvira can have. And I came home and told my wife about the meeting, and she said, well, you're taking the job because I want to meet her, and the only way I get to meet her is if you take this job. I said, okay. And then I mentioned it to the artist I was working with the most, Dave Acosta, and he said, well, you're taking this job because I love Elvira more than anything, and I want to draw Elvira. I said, okay, with that pressure in mind. And Dave did something really nice. He sent me Mad Magazine pages and pages of Angel and the Ape and covers of 1950 celebrity comic books like Jerry Lewis comics and Bob Hope's comics. And he said, I think you're thinking too much about this as like a horror comic that's funny rather than a comedy comic that's set in the world of horror.
Yeah.
And that unlocked it for me. And I had like 3 pitches. And the first one was Elvira time travels. I thought, well, she's a host. She's always introducing people to horror movies. How about she meets Mary Shelley and Edgar Allan Poe and Bram Stoker, and I have her on the set in that series of Bride of Frankenstein. And then the second pitch I had was Elvira Goes to Hell. And the villains I gave her in the first series were the historical Vlad the Impaler, because I thought that would be fun to play with. You know, instead of a guy who looks like Bela Lugosi, he's a guy who looks like Sean Connery. He's a big warlord with a droopy mustache and a helmet and armor. But I also made him a vampire because I thought it's a horror comic. Let's make him a real vampire anyway.
Yeah.
And the guy pulling the strings behind the scenes is Faust. And I set all this up before I knew we were going to another series. Before I knew that was supposed to be a 4-issue series. And they said, can you do 8? And I said, okay. I said, okay, well, if I do 8, my second pitch that you didn't choose was Elvira in Hell. So I want to do Elvira in Hell. And so when Elvira is confronting Faust at the end of the first series, and in issue 4, it's the exact moment that Mephistopheles shows up and says, your time's up, buddy. And Elvira goes, I just want to make very clear, I am not with him. And he whisks her off to hell anyway, which gave me a chance to talk about hell for 4 issues. But the working relationship is I write the scripts, I send them in, and I get notes. And the notes, honestly, God bless her, are usually between between 0 and maybe 4 joke punch-ups. So it's on page 5. Instead of saying this, I'd like to say that.
Yeah.
And she always she always phrases it as like, but you know, you're the writer. If you don't like it, stick with your original line. And I'm like, it's an Elvira joke written by Cassandra Peterson. I think I'm going to use it. You know,
yeah.
It's very rare that I substitute my, and she's very aware. There was a moment that's actually a very dramatic moment in issue 8 where Elvira is finally escaping from hell. And there was a really low hanging fruit joke you could make from the dialogue that I had there. And when she gave me the notes, she said, you could do this joke, but I have a sense that you want to keep this moment straight. So I just am pointing out that you could do this joke, but if you don't want to do it, I totally understand. And I didn't want to do it. It was, literally she's leaving hell and she says, she says to Lucifer, I'm something you'll never be. I'm free. And I knew that the low hanging fruit joke is, but I'm not easy or I'm not cheap or whatever. But I was like, that would undercut the power of her mouthing off to Satan, face to face. So she has a good mind for that and was like, I get that this moment might play better without a joke. And I was like, okay, thank you. So that's and there have been projects like, I was in the middle of writing Vincent Price, Elvira meets Vincent Price, when the pandemic hit. And I think I was writing issue 2 when I got that stop work because we don't know when this thing is ever going to be published. And I said, okay. And then maybe a month later, maybe 3 weeks later, they reached out to me and said, Dynamite, and said, Cassandra, we want to do maybe like a Kickstarter story. And Cassandra wants to be a little more involved this time. So would you jump on a phone call with her? And we hadn't spoken. We had met. I had gone to some horror con in Southern California, probably Monster Palooza, just to like jump to the head of the line and say, hey, I'm David. I'm writing your comic book. So we had met and taken a picture together for PR and all that. But we got on the phone and we ended up talking for like 2 hours. And it was awesome.
Nice.
And, 80% of it was shooting the shit and talking about friends we had in common and life experiences we had in common and all that. And I told her my idea for the comic, which was to do a satire of the pandemic, which was tricky. But it was called The Omega Man, because The Omega Man is one of my favorite movies. And I will say Dave Acosta gave me the joke. I called him up and said, we're doing something about the pandemic. You're going to draw it. It's going to be called something like The Last Showgirl on Earth or The Omega Woman or something. And he said, dude, The Omega Ma'am. I went, oh shit. That is, why did I not see that? So we worked on that together. And since then we check in with one another on the phone. It is an odd thing for someone who was like a teenager into my mid-20s in the 80s. I'm doing Drawing Blood with Kevin Eastman, and I'm doing books with Elvira, and the fact that the two collaborators who call me the most on the phone are the guy who created the Ninja Turtles and Elvira, Mistress of the Dark, is just kind of a funny, like, when the phone rings, you're like, all right, this is my life now. My life is
you're like, my life's not so bad.
Yeah, my life, but it's not so bad, but it's also very 1985.
Well, real quick before we wrap up, I wanted to ask you that because one of my favorite creators in comics is Kevin Eastman.
Sure.
I love Kevin Eastman. I got to meet him and his wife Courtney a few years ago. I got to do a panel with him. He's going to be back at our show. I get to do the panel with him again. It was probably the best. It's the Huntsville Comic and Pop Culture Expo. And
get him to invite me.
I will. Okay. Let me write that note down. But like Kevin's such a cool dude. I had a great conversation with him. And Drawing Blood is a really great book. And you can obviously see the parallels to Kevin's career. But I'm pretty sure that you have some personal touches in there. And I just wanted to ask you kind of like what in there is you, I guess, or just general, something like that.
It's such a telepod Brundlefly kind of a thing. Obviously he's Brundle and I'm Fly. I'm the small.
Okay. You just happen to be in the teleportation chamber.
Yeah. But there's a lot of me in it. I mean, the main character is, I would say, 85% Kevin and about 15% me. He's nicer than I am, because Kevin's nicer than I am. He's more forgiving than I am, because Kevin is more forgiving than I am. But there are a couple, like one crucial element that I always talk about, because people really want gossip. So I'm always asked if his rocky relationship with his brother, Shane Bookman and Paul Bookman, is based on Kevin's relationship with Peter Laird. And I have a great out for that, because which also happens to be true, which is I have a bad relationship with my sister. And when it came time to do this book, I said, I'd like to make the relationship between Paul and Shane really broken. And I'd like to make them brothers, because that's more fraught than roommates who made a comic together. Like, it's more of a, when it's your family members, I have had to live through a decade of people telling me, oh, you should call your sister. It's like, no, she really doesn't want to hear from you guys. She really, like, it was her choice and she doesn't want to hear from me, and I'm out of her life, and I'm happy for her that that's what she wanted and that's what she got. But Paul Bookman is absolutely based more on my sister than Peter Laird. Like, he's a balding guy in a bow tie, and that's a little bit of Peter cosplay, but the relationship between the two of them is based on my fraught relationship with my sister, not, and again, the last issue that came out, issue 7, the homecoming issue, there's a confrontation at the end of the book. Like, a lot of it is verbatim from conversations I've had in my life. But it's also worth noting that, like, Kevin reads these scripts and we get together, and like that issue, we got together for a whole day. And I just asked him to tell stories about his hometown and who was your best friend and what was your girlfriend in high school like, and are you still in touch with her, and what was this like and what was that like. And a lot of that in the book is Kevin, but in that issue, maybe 35-40% of his relationship to his hometown. And look, one of the reasons that we can work together is we're simpatico. We have similar worldviews. We have similar ways of thinking about things. So what I was going to say earlier is, when I send him the scripts, he's never come back to me and said, no, I don't think Shane Bookman would say that. I don't think Shane Bookman feels that way about the world. I don't think this should happen. I don't think that should happen. There was issue 4 where he goes to New York Comic-Con, and the young woman who's doing a webcomic kind of calls, not knowing she's talking to Shane Bookman, says, oh yeah, the Brookman brothers, they kind of sold out to a major corporation and blah, 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 blah. And then he did that publishing company, but kind of went nowhere and crashed and burned and whatever. I had a great, not great, but I had some misgivings. I'm like going to send this to him and like, here's a recap of all the worst things that ever happened to you and terrible things that people said about you at the time. And, I had no guarantee he would be okay with that. and the moment where he says to her, look, I was trying to create a place where people could come and create their dream projects in comics, and I ended up with a halfway house for middle-aged hacks who had done their best work when Bill Clinton was president, or when Ronald Reagan was president, really. And I was very concerned at how that line would land on the publisher of Tundra.
Yeah.
And he said to me, oh, David, I've had that conversation with 1,000 people and said things very much like that. So like, don't sweat it. Like, don't ever think you're going to offend me with, you know, an honest appraisal of what happened with the Turtles, or an honest appraisal of what happened with Tundra and all that. But the book is, you know, for both of us, it's very personal, and it's a rehashing of painful experiences we've both had, you know.
Well, I would encourage. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, and again, more of his experiences than mine. But, you know, when you start writing a thing, it can't help but become also you. You know?
Yeah, I would encourage everybody to read Drawing Blood. It is incredibly well done. Also, the Elvira book and this new Red Sonja Noir book. I'm very excited for you. I everything I've read from you, they're good. They're briskly paced. Everything flows really well. The jokes are there. They're really good.
I'm a pacing nut. I think the most awful thing you can do to an audience is bore them. Even if you're trying to suggest to them that something happened that was boring, you can do that in a panel, man. You don't need to bore them. Like, you don't need to. So yeah, sometimes I think I can go a little overboard with the, and then this, and then this, and then this, and then this. But I'd rather live in the world where no one has ever been bored reading one of my comics, and they, you know, they move.
Yeah. I got a buddy whose name is David. But he runs an actual video store in town, right? And I've known him for over 25 years, and he's got a saying that I think he probably borrowed from someone else, but this has always stuck with me. He's like, the unforgivable sin of art is not to be bad, but to be boring.
Yeah.
Like bad movies, there's nothing wrong with watching a bad movie. But
a
boring movie, that's the unforgivable sin.
And movies that are truly bad are bad because they're boring, because they take no risks. I'd rather see a new David Cronenberg movie than anyone else, because I know it's not ever going to be a thing where I'm like, oh, he just kind of phoned this one in. You know, like, no, it's always like, I've got a bunch of uncomfortable shit that I've been thinking about, and we're going to go through all of this uncomfortable shit that I've been thinking about together. And while I don't love everything that he's done, he's always swinging for 500 feet. He's always doing something no one has ever done before. And that's, like, to me, that always wins. Like my least favorite Scorsese movie in a walk is The Departed. Because anyone could have made it. Nothing about it. I don't see the slightest glimmer of the man who made Taxi Driver in that movie.
Yeah. I get an argument with people over that movie, because I was like, it's a shame that that's what he won his Academy Award for, because he should have gotten it for Raging Bull or Taxi Driver or so many other projects. And I'm like, Departed is,
it's just the safest. It's the safest thing he could have done. And he could have sent an assistant to direct that movie for him. And I don't know that it would have come out terribly different. And that's I mean, I think it's funny, his weird feud with Marvel movies, which is not him. It's interviewers knowing they can get a dumb quote. I hate that, because the Martin Scorsese Daredevil movie would have been better than anything he's made in about 10 years. You know, like, I think it would have actually reinvigorated him to do something pulpy. For a change. Instead of trying to make serious Oscar bait movies. It's like, no, you used to actually be good at being entertaining. You should try that again. But yeah, and also the follow-up question everybody asks the great auteurs, how do you feel about superhero movies? And they say, I hate them. They're not cinema, whatever. You never get the follow-up question. What Marvel movies have you seen, Martin Scorsese?
Yeah.
I don't I don't believe Marty dragged himself to 22 Marvel movies. I think he saw Iron Man and went, this is nice.
Yeah, probably, right?
And then maybe he saw Iron Man 2 and went, wow, this is one of the worst movies I've ever seen in my life.
Or maybe he'd be like, Thor Dark World is the best thing I've ever seen from Marvel.
But you know what I mean? It's like the idea that that analysis is coming from a place of, I've seen 32 of these movies and I have an informed, considered opinion about them. I just do not see. I don't think Martin Scorsese is going out to see Justice League. I don't think he's going to see Batman v Superman. I don't like.
Yeah,
I just don't think he's doing it.
I think most of those.
I don't think he goes to see Man of Steel. I don't. I just don't believe it.
I think Marty makes those statements because I think it's more of a lamentation of what cinema used to be. Like, I wish I could go to the movie theater and watch the kind of movies I want to watch, but instead there's like 8 screens showing the new Marvel movie or something like that.
And I don't disagree with that, but where he loses me totally, I don't think it's the job of any director to tell any filmmakers that they're not making cinema. I think that's horseshit. I don't think you put down other artists like that.
Yeah.
I think the people that eat, like, there are bad movies that are made by people who take their eye off the ball. I think Iron Man 2 is a perfect example of 2 goofballs thinking they can improv their way through a blockbuster movie and make one that's good instead of a tightly scripted story that makes sense. But I don't think Kenneth Branagh got up every morning to make Thor and went, this is going to be so fucking stupid. You know?
Yeah, exactly.
I've worked on incredibly bad movies where we were all trying our goddamnedest to make a good movie, as much as we possibly could. And I just think it's too condescending and insulting to the people who make those movies to go, you weren't trying. You weren't. Tell Ryan Coogler he wasn't trying with Black Panther. Fuck you, man. He was trying.
Oh yeah.
You know, he had shit to say. He had things he was trying to get across. You know, you're not going to convince me that Wolf of Wall Street is more profound a cultural artifact than Black Panther, man. You'll never convince me of that. And I don't mean to pick on Marty. Like I said, I think they're talking to someone who has as close to zero experience as possible.
Yeah.
You know, it's like asking me what I think about some anime series I've seen 1 episode of.
Yeah. And you're just blanket statement like, that's not real animation.
I don't think it's very good. You know, it's like, it's not Miyazaki. I don't care for it. You know, you don't know, man. You haven't, you know, I try very hard. I try very hard not to have opinions about things I haven't experienced, which is why I have hate watched things, because I've known, like, I am not a big Tarantino fan, and I'm not like, I'm going to be expected to have an opinion about this fucking thing, so I'd better watch it. So I will not have an opinion about movies I haven't seen. My joke is I tried to watch The Hateful Eight, and I got as far as The Hateful Four. And then I turned it off. Last 90 minutes of the movie may be a masterpiece. I have no idea. Anyway, we've gone.
David, I feel like we have just scratched the surface of a conversation between us, because I'm a big film guy. I love comics, and I think there's a lot more to unpack. Luckily, you're a very prolific writer, and there'll be more opportunities in the future. You are now a friend of the show. You're welcome back anytime. Anytime you want to promote something or talk about something, you just let me know.
I will reach out when I have things.
Yes, definitely. Absolutely. So, final thoughts, and Red Sonja Noir sounds great. I'm excited for it, bro. Noir.
Buy it so that we can do more of them.
Yes. And I'm sure you already said, there's more Elvira on the way, right?
There will be more Elvira on the way, and there is Two-Fisted Fairy Tales, which I still don't have a release date for, but I'm writing it. It's great.
Heck yeah. Well, David, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule. You out there watching, thank you so much for being here, whether it's live or on the replay. We are dipping out. Station